Mary is Executive Director of the Holochain Foundation. You are CEO of Holo Hosting. And the way I've really been thinking about this, you have been championing and building solutions on the edge to make our lives better for your entire career. That is literally who you have been. So it would make sense that you don't feel as though you are in the, easily defined job category. I think that we are more used to seeing men be in this sort of breakthrough visionary category, right? And we don't give ourselves credit as women that are doing that. So I think that that's why people are so excited about your work and also fascinated by you, Mary, because you have not been at all intimidated or daunted by the unknown.
It's really interesting that you say that. I am always surprised or shocked when somebody walks up to me and goes, "Oh, thank you for doing what you're doing. It's so exciting to see a woman in this kind of role." And I was like, oh, okay, because it just seems like so obvious that this is what I should be doing.
Well, I was listening to some of the earlier interviews you've done with other people, and you and I had talked about this actually when we had breakfast that morning in Denver about, growing up with your dad who had a computer around. Like that was and Arthur has talked about this, our mutual friend, right? When you've grown up around these technologies, they don't seem as daunting. What was your dad doing that made it so that this was already in your house when you were young?
Right. So, I grew up, my father was in the armed forces. I traveled the world. I grew up in Spain. It just was normal to be doing international travel. I had stories of my family, of everybody like traipsing around the world, starting businesses, doing things that in my youth sounded, oh, okay. That's normal. That's cool. That's what people do. And then, being an engineer, he was working in radar systems and doing, basically traveling around after he retired from the military, also traveling around and helping install and create radar systems all over the world for other countries and other groups that were putting these things together. And because of that, it was just normal. Like we always had like the first computers that came out. I mean, maybe not the first ones, I don't know. We had the TI-99, we had the Commodore 64, we then, we evolved up into the Mac Classic, and then, all of the other, DOS systems and then Windows systems. It was just always part of the equation. It was in the house, and it was in public areas of the house that could be used, could be learned. It's like, hey, here's this new thing. You want to learn how to do it? Cool, let's do it. It didn't strike me as anything out of the ordinary. And it wasn't until I got into the university where I realized, oh, other people haven't done this, right? It didn't come up for me much in high school. I used it to write papers. At the time, it was just a word processor is kind of how it looked in some era. I mean, I didn't even take the computer courses. This was in the 80s, right? I didn't even take the computer courses at school. I didn't bother. I had it at home. I didn't think about it. And it wasn't really until university and then getting into first jobs where it was like, oh, you know how to use a computer? Cool, great, come help us, come work in our law firm and you can help us do all these things. And I was like, oh, thanks, cool, I'd like to do that. At first it was just business tools. It was just, this is how you get things done. You automate everything. I remember working on Lotus Notes. Before we had Windows, really, I was working Lotus Notes. None of this seemed out of the ordinary. And I don't know what it is about my personality just to sort of like take everything new and go, okay, let's use that. How can we make the best of it? How can we make ourselves more efficient from it? That is a generational thing, efficiency, right? I mean, like we grew up in that generation of, oh, yes, how do we not do this by hand?
The common thread here, right? It's not just about efficiency, right? You were trying to figure out how to make things better for people, right? So, the first job, right, in your telecom world where you were talking about that, you had to do everything by hand and you're like going, oh, Mom, oh, yeah. And I think about it right now for the 20-year-olds that are coming into work that are sitting here going, why are we still doing it this way? And I always say that if you want to be actually more efficient or, scale things faster inside your organization, ask the youngest people on your team because they're working with tools that are different than what they're really actually working with, right? Or an understanding or a confidence around them that is very different. So the fact that you were bringing that in from, early stages, but I don't think it was just about that, right? I think you've always had this bent to try and figure out how we make the system work better.
You walk into something that's just feels like it's overwhelming and feels like you can't get it done all by yourself. Well, what do? You look to technology. I mean, that to me has been the constant in my life. And whether or not it's like a personal project or whether or not it's a large telecommunications project or whether it's Holochain, that's the answer, right? How do you get something done and how do you make it more able to meet the challenge that the stakeholders need you look to technology. And so I guess in that sense, yes, I'm at heart always somebody who's going to be at the innovation edge for technology.
Right. So let's talk about then the holochain, because it's interesting. Often we talk about technology and we think about this as this behemoth that's kind of taking over our lives. And as much as we think that it can add, productivity or it can add whatever to our lives, I think we're starting to feel a sense of concern about that, right? That it's overstepping and it's overreaching and it's not quite holding us as well as we all were hoping that it could do. And so we've got this love-hate relationship right now with, technology being an enabler versus not. And enter Holochain, this project
Right.
I've also been a champion of since its first moment that it was named, and was very excited to help work on the logo and some of the other things. But, I come at it very much as a non-technical person when I describe it to others around the world. You're sitting, at a coffee table with someone says, tell me about Holochain. How do you describe it?
Okay, I'm going to step back because you said a lot of things in that intro question. Well, one thing I want to start with is that I'm glad that you're talking about it in a non-technical way, because talking about it in a non-technical way is the only way to actually have people understand something. There are very few people that can understand the deep technology that's something that is cutting edge or bleeding edge, period.
That's always my frustration, right? When we start to describe a thing, we always go into the technological underpinnings of it as opposed to sort of conceptual and what it can do for you.
So I'm not going to do that.
Okay.
I'm going to start with, hey, why are we building something? And what is it? Well, why is we had this idea with the advent of the internet, World Wide Web 1, WWW 1, right? This transformation in information availability, in the creation of knowledge being accessible to everybody was just going to democratize everything. And we were going to break down barriers. And we did for a little bit. And we created new ones, right? We created digital divides. We created all sorts of other new forms of the people who know and the people who don't know at different stages. But we did break down some barriers. Distance went away, right?
Right.
Transformed massively. And what I like to say about this is this goes back to and aligns with all the other technological transformations around communication that have happened over millennium, right? And so the advent of the printing press transformed everything in the world. And we've got social scientists that have been still researching that for a long, long time, telling us exactly how it transformed things. Well, the internet and the World Wide Web in particular did that when it arrived in the 90s. And it seemed to democratize everything. And we were so excited because participating in that bleeding edge, what can we do? Websites, of course, information, putting things out. The beginning of beautiful things like Wikipedia really kind of grounded our love for what can be done with this new world of knowledge sharing and this new world of commons, right? That seemed to be emerging. And then we wanted to be more effective. And so what did we do? We started transforming that technology, and little by little, we built up the tools that allowed us to get to what we thought was this more effective Web 2.0. I was part of that. I was on the bleeding edge of that, creating the early content management systems that you could do. Oh, you don't want just one website. You want a website that can control the data of multiple websites, because we don't live in a world that's flat data. We live in worlds that have hierarchies and mechanisms for permissions and all of these things that they make the life of business, the life of organizations function. Right? So we needed technology that could mirror that. Well, Web 2.0 started mirroring that for us. And it was fabulous for a little while. We all became super productive. And then our super productivity created platforms. And then platforms became the way that everybody could do things easily. The UX revolution, right? User experience revolution on platforms, because no longer did you have to keep dealing with the hardships of deploying and change and end users having to relearn things, readopt things, reinstall things, deal with things so difficult. We just kept making it easier and easier and easier. And by we, I mean the people who were doing the building of the technology, the people who owned the IP of the technology, the people who then owned the data that everybody put into this technology and into these platforms. Oh, and now we want to make money off of it. So then it's the advertising and the revenue from advertising that these platforms started generating based on all the data that we inadvertently added to all the platforms. Oh, who owns it? 5 companies in the world.
First, these technologies came around and people were trying to figure out how to play with them. And we're excited about the fact that they didn't have to get like a subscription to them, right? We were excited that we got them for free. The companies were trying to figure out, well, how to monetize that and how to make sense of it. And so the sort of invention of taking this old thing, which is advertising, and throwing it onto this new technology was sort of changed the game then. But that wasn't actually the original intent, right, when these things were designed or created.
I don't think any of us knew. That was the thing when you were on the bleeding edge back in the early 90s and or late 90s, even early 2000s, like when so much of the technical revolution that was happening in Web 2 was happening, advertising was something you did one-to-one. Like you had a website and you looked out, hey, who wants to put an ad on my website? And you sold advertising to somebody that had a relevant, like you knew that you had a relevant community to them. But it wasn't being sort of targeted in this large business sort of way. But it's not surprising that it came in, really. I mean, advertising, if all you have to do is go back to other forms, other mediums, right, of the communication that had evolved. We have radio, we have TV, we have the web, and radio and TV advertising came in very quickly, very early. There were syndicates. There were ways that this stuff started centralizing. They did have revenue models based on getting into the forms of knowledge sharing, communication sharing, and how do you pay for all of that creation of content in those forms? And so it's really not surprising, even if some of us didn't see it at the time that we were doing the technical revolution side of it, it's not surprising that some of the other people who were doing the business transformations did see it and that it did come in. And I don't know how early or how late that happened, to be honest.
Yeah, if you bring an outdated economic model into a new technology, it doesn't necessarily work well. Like, I just think it's an extractive model that is, holding us hostage in these places. But the point is, what are the business models of the future, right? Then what are the economic models of the future? We start to imagine that we can have, again, constant innovation in how we coordinate and connect with one another. The question will become, how do we rethink the financial side of it?
That is what's exciting about Holochain, but I think you have to see the problem first, right? Because I don't know that we realized that as an innovation, the Web 2.0 was actually repeating the same patterns with the centralization. And that's when the advent of Napster happened, right? Where you started seeing the earliest mass adoption of peer-to-peer technology that came out, and it was being used. Unfortunately, it evolved quickly because it was in the realm of music, and we have this massive art connection to something like that, music and video and things like that. But it also, because that area already had so much legal and large enterprise ownership of IP with a way to control it, that's when we sort of learned, there is control over technology. And there are mechanisms for getting outside of some of those controls. But if we do it in ways that are already controlled at a legal level, then there's no path forward. And that's kind of what happened. I mean, I think we saw the first advent of peer-to-peer, where we were trying to step into a new model of, well, what is it to share things? What is it to create a digital commons? That's what people were doing.
Back in my advertising career, I was actually asked by the RIAA, the Recording Institute of America, whatever it was, the acronym, to try and stop. We were trying to create a campaign to get 16-year-olds to stop downloading from Napster or stop using LimeWire, right? We did all the psychology and understanding what they were doing. But really, there was such frustration against the industry at the time. People were so angry that they had to buy an entire album to get one decent song. So that it wasn't so much that they could just go steal music. It was that they were actually pushing against a system that they didn't think treated them very, very fairly.
And that's because the industry was resisting the technology that had come out. We were all saying, But it's possible to make an MP3. It's possible to give me a single song. I want to pay 99 cents for one song. Why won't you let me pay 99 cents for one song? Why are you forcing me to pay $15? I'm a high school student. I don't have $15. I have $1. Let me give it to you, please.
And the minute that came around, then finally, because that was, I think, what the big, breakthrough was, that finally then the recording industry did make it so that we were able to buy a song at a time. And then when we were able to do that, people were like, fine, I don't need to go steal it. The model just shifted, and you gave us an opportunity to buy the thing that I really wanted to buy the way I wanted to go buy it. And then you enter Spotify, which becomes a whole nother big revolution in the industry, which again controls it with the people who hold the IP, not necessarily the people who are creating the content.
The reason I bring all that up is because I think that you have to, like, if you understand that Napster was one of the first really widespread peer-to-peer networks, you sort of can go, oh, so somebody wants something and they want to do something without going through some central entity. And the reason Holochain exists, Holochain is, in what I like to just say simply, is a way for people to interact directly without an intermediary. And when I say that, it means that you can have a chat application that doesn't go through Facebook servers, that allows you to talk to your friends. And that's it. You can have it installed, they can have it installed, and you don't have Google, Facebook, anybody, Signal, anyone else in the middle running servers for you on your behalf to have that communication flow. Now, there's more to it. There's more technological complexity that I'm not going into. There are aspects of every protocol that have to be able to interact. But it's going over a lot of the networks that already exist, the internet frameworks that already exist, using open protocols that already exist. And so this is an important step forward, because it doesn't matter just for one application. It's that we're making something possible that isn't just about a chat application. We didn't start by building a chat application that was peer-to-peer. We actually went lower level than that. And what we said was necessary was starting at the beginning and going, how do you build something that allows the people that are using it to be in control? There's a difference between who writes a set of rules and who controls something after players play a game with a set of rules. If you think about it like Monopoly, who's controlling Monopoly as a game? Nobody's controlling it. I mean, we can talk about the IP and who can sell the game called Monopoly. That's a different story.
That's a whole other story, by the way.
That's a whole other story. But the reality is every time Monopoly's played, it's just a group of people agreeing to play by a set of rules. How do we look at technical systems? Because it seems like every time a new advent of technology comes in, a new innovation in technology comes in, especially when we're talking about communications and knowledge technologies, we end up kind of going down a path where ultimately it gets constrained again by the powers that be. Is it possible to create a technological framework that can't be constrained like that actually does put it in the commons, in the spaces where we get to opt into the communities and we get to share how the technology works as individuals and in our chosen groups? What difference does it make? We tend to give away our data to folks like Google or Facebook in return for applications like messaging, email, or those sorts of things for free, right, so to speak, and I kind of put that in quotes, because they can make money off of the data in some way, which we've talked about already, the advertising thing. And then we get to have these conversations inside of this framework or this messaging framework. But then they get to use the information in these messaging frameworks to actually enhance the advertising model. It costs money for them to actually host and maintain the software and make it available to us. So they do need to have a business model. This is like, it's not like we want to like throw business models under the bus. They're important. They're part of our economic frameworks. We do need to have them, but maybe they're not necessary everywhere. Maybe in some areas, it's okay to have small networks that are communicating, that don't need to be about the business need, that are to route that, right? I mean, like if you have a small community, you don't need your small community necessarily running things that are at global scale in order to have communication. You just each need to like play a part and be willing to like each have a computer that can hold data. That's good enough.
I really do think that when we look at the future of coordination, right, there will be a very, very different way of thinking about why you put something at the center. The way I was describing this in the early days is, right, we were trying to flip the internet inside out. You put the person at the center and the application on the outside as opposed to the application at the center, right? And the opposite. When you explain that to people, on the one hand, it sounds really great. On the other hand, it sounds really overwhelming. Like, I don't know that I want to be in charge of all this. Like, I want something that keeps me safe. I want something that somehow coordinates it and makes it somehow, I don't know, that we didn't trust ourselves very much, I think, in those early conversations when I was having that with people and trying to describe it. But when you say I want a more human internet, right, that sounds really provocative. For me, it is that I get ultimate personalization of various things, but I don't think that that's being used then to extract from me. It's just being used to serve me in some fascinating way.
The scale conversation is actually really important. And I want to come back to this because it isn't about the individual and it isn't about the global, everybody can see everything. It's all these spaces in the middle that are necessary, that where thriving is really happening in all of our communities, right? And one of the things that has happened with the way that the technologies have evolved is that whether they're nonprofit groups, whether they're community groups, whether they're whatever they might be, they're at the effect of whatever is going on in the business communities. And that's actually something that I think can be problematic because thriving in communities cannot be tied, one-to-one to profit making at business levels. And I think this is key because businesses have an imperative to grow profitability and to let go of the things that don't give it to them. So what we've seen over the course of the last 20 years is that some of the enhancements, some of the products, some of the services that had evolved that were perfect for these smaller communities, they were just pulled offline. Those tools were made unavailable for the communities that were thriving in the use of them. That actually is problematic because we need all of the layers of scale, all of the levels to be supported, and not one technology can do that. What if you can have levels that are smaller and medium and have interoperability between these and modularity about how you do this? Does it all have to be connected to the extractive, processes that are existing? Does it all have to be in the business context, or can we have both community and business context thriving in a weave that constructs a new kind of social fabric? That's really what we're talking about being possible with Holochain.
How do you describe this in a more tangible way? So part of the way, again, I talk about it is that if I had an app right now that could serve even 1 billion people, maybe it's not just even 10 people, but it could even serve 1 billion people, the constraint would be that I wouldn't be able to pay for server space, right? And I would have to put some sort of like extractive business model on top of it in order to be able to ensure that I could get this app out to 1 billion people, right? Does Holochain become a solution where I can grow something that I really think is important to offer to people, but not have to pay for that at that extractive level? Like, I'm sure that there's still, this is where Holo Host comes in, but there's a cost associated with it, but they're not those kinds of extractive. So it's a surveillance issue, but there's also a scalability issue.
Right. Well, the scalability part is really important, but I'm going to press back against the 1 billion people all in one space, because what I think we found from a social science and like talking about the more human internet, a more human internet isn't 1 billion of us talking in one chat group. That's actually the fundamental thing. We do work. It's about how do the groupings work? How should they work? Well, we've been limited to the groupings coming into existence through the centralized technology. What if, and this is the part where when you said what if it's about like the individuals, like change the frame about it being like it's sourced at the place where the human is at the center and the application is secondary. Well, that's very important, but it's not about how hard it is or how easy it is, because I think it can be just as easy. Like, ease of use can be attained in Holochain. That's just designing a good application, right? Yeah. That's not the issue. The issue is, how does the evolution of group coordination evolve when humans are opting into different groupings and different membranes? How does that change the dynamic of what's possible for coordination? So instead of, hey, one person has to be the admin, I'm going to start by being the admin of the group on a Facebook chat, and then I get to say what all the rules are. What if there is a different form of evolution of like how groups come together? Maybe it is 2 people, then it's 3 people, then they open it up. Like, you can have You can have invitations. You can use some of the same forms that exist. But what Holochain actually starts doing and breaking open is that there could be new ways, new mechanisms for group evolution together and group coordination. And it could grow to that 1 billion. The scale, you could still be using the same application, but that doesn't mean you're all in the same space together at every moment.
Yeah.
And the scaling really is about, well, we're all holding a piece of it on our own computer. You don't have to have the company in the middle that is doing the hosting for 1 billion people and paying for the hosting for 1 billion people. That's the big difference. Social media is a special case. People spend so much time and energy and effort in like the secret sauce of like having adoption work, having usability, not just be about function, but to be about motivation. And so that amount of energy has to be spent on anybody building a Holochain application in the social media space. If you don't have that secret sauce for with inclusive of all the motivation factors, you're not going to have a social media that takes off. And it doesn't matter that it's federated. It doesn't matter that it's distributed. It doesn't matter about all those things, because at the end of the day, mass scale adoption has to have something in it for them.
Well, part of it is that you have your other people there, right? I've tried to go to Blue Sky or go to other places that I'm just like whistling in the wind, like no one is there. And so that doesn't feel good. But then I think it's, to your point, also the algorithmic feeding, right, of the content, so that I'm finding the things that make me feel good. And the question is, can you build a site like that that actually does make me feel good and not just make me feel angry or make me feel anxious or make me feel whatever? Because part of their secret sauce is to antagonize me or agitate me enough to want to go and share and get more involved. How do you hold people well, and how do you give them the content that excites them and wants them to stay engaged in a place like that, in a way that doesn't create more anger?
But this is why I don't think it's the first adoption strategy for Holochain.
Yeah.
That is hard. When I was talking about the evolution side of things, about the evolving social fabric, that is what I'm talking about. It doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't happen. The secret sauce of distributed social comes from the evolution of social groups coordinating from a new model. It doesn't come from trying to do it the way that everybody else has already done it. And so it can't happen overnight. And I think it's the hard part there. But when you're talking about functional things like contract signing, you're talking about functional things like term sheets and spreadsheets that you don't want shared. You're talking about coordination or collaboration that you don't want Google in the middle and you don't want these signing companies in the middle of. That's easy. Right. That's really easy. Yeah. Let's just build those apps and get them out there. Let's have some folks take some chances. Let's disrupt this industry. It's not, to me, that's a no-brainer. You don't have the same identity in every context. You don't share the same information about yourself in every context. And so the idea that we would have a system that is based the way that blockchain works, which is like everything's online and is at this particular level of the whole world has to agree to it, that starts creating a fundamental scary situation, because it means that once you share it, it's the truth. It's the only truth, or it's the thing about you. And if you think about this, like, do you want identity to be your legal identity? Do you want your digital identity just to be your legal identity? I don't. I don't have my legal identity on Facebook. I don't want my legal identity on Facebook. I may choose to use my name that is also in my, in a space, but dang it, it's scary when they actually, in a social context, want to force you into using legal identity, because legal identity is about a control mechanism with a government. And maybe that doesn't matter in the United States, where we have where we think we have a relative ease of freedom and whatnot. But in Taiwan, it matters a lot. Because even the government doesn't want the folks that live in Taiwan to have to share all their legal information in some way that is accessible to China, essentially. What happens when something goes wrong and like everybody's identity in every system is their legal identity? That really puts everybody at risk. That is a bad setup for long-term ways of handling it. So what we are talking about is like, no, it comes back to that same thing, the way I was describing healthcare and whatnot. It has to be focused on like starting with you and what you share, in what context you share. Do you have different personas that you share out? Yes, sometimes you are working with somebody that has to like do a verification because there are policies, rules. You're working with a bank, they have to actually verify you in a legal way. Great. Then what do you go through to make sure that you have a private way of doing that sort of verification? It can't be the same as what you put yourself out on a social app. It can't be the same as what you do when you're going to just chat with friends or
the doctor. Yeah.
Or go to the doctor. Like you don't want all those things to be one and the same. And besides that, what happens about human expression and experimentation in art when identity is only singular? Like it just fundamentally breaks down what is the possibility around culture. That's not, I don't want a world that goes that direction.
How far are we along on being able to do that and being able to have those?
If I had the right set of founders and developers and I weren't building what I'm building right now, I'd be doing it. That's how far along we are.
We got to attract people to want to go and solve for that. Because again, I mean, everyone's looking for the problem space, right? Everyone's looking for a place where they can go in and do their thing. The problem is we're still speaking the language of unicorns. So that's a big paradigm shift, right? Because at one point I did have actually one of the Holochain apps. I forgot what Matthew and I were doing. I think it was like the Kanban board kind of coordination app. And it's just like, it's literally like he had on his computer, I had on my computer. There was nobody else that we were, that was in the middle. It's so mind-bending to imagine that. And I've been in hackathons with developers that have come from the blockchain world, right? And then they enter the Holochain space. And it takes them a little while. And there's a moment where something just flips. Like they get this big aha that something is different. Can you explain? Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you seen that?
A couple of different ones. I've definitely seen it. Even with blockchain, there are servers around the world that are agreeing to what is the state, right? These servers cost a lot of money to host, which is why you have to have currencies that are running on them natively to be able to do the processing so that you can have basically an economy of paying for the servers, essentially. I mean, that is what we're dealing with. And it was built in. And in some ways, it was brilliant, right? To be able to build that mechanism in and still create sort of a distributed way to come to consensus. Fabulous. Very important revolution, innovation. The thing is that we don't have to have consensus by everybody for everything. One of the great examples, and one of the ways that people started talking about this recently is like, imagine a poker game, right? Poker's played all around the world. But how many people are playing a poker game? How many people have to agree to the state of your poker game, right? If there's 5 people playing, 5 people have to agree that you're all playing by the same rules, that nobody's cheating, and that the outcome is the outcome. You do not need, whatever thousands of people halfway around the world saying, yep, y'all did it right.
Yeah. I mean, this is what I always say, again, Holochain is so much more efficient, right? It is so much faster. It is so much less energy intense. It is so much more, interoperable, right? And its ability to go solve some of these things that people think that blockchain can go solve for. But it's just, I think of it as this big, heavy, I don't know what the word is. I keep thinking of like jackhammery as opposed to this much more light way of being able to go do what we're trying to go do with Holochain.
Well, that's just it. You don't have to validate everything. You need to validate what's important to you in the spaces that are important. And what you need to know is that everybody's playing by the same rules. Everybody agrees that nobody's cheating. And everybody agrees that these are the outcomes that were. So this is the local state. And so if you're agreeing to and validating local state, you can share then local state because it might be important for you to say, hey, there was this poker game. Oh, by the way, that was part of this big tournament. And these people played in this tournament and this person won this tournament. That is information that a lot of people want to know, and they want to know it was all valid. And so, yes, you have local state, and then you have a way to share the validated local state across other contexts. And so what Holochain really allows to happen is this sort of interoperability across multiple contexts of what's happening in this place, how it's validated, that the rules were followed. And you're using a lot of the same technology that people already understand from the blockchain. You're using the same sort of cryptographic signing. Well, that's very important. Great. That's what wallets use to sign transactions. You're using a form of validity. Oh, there's a group of people who it's going to, and it's being spread out, and not just one person or two people say that it's valid, the ones that are involved, but another group of people who are watching what's going on. They're part of this local group that are getting the information and saying, yes, they all followed the rules. Yes, we agree. We're gossiping that information. And so there's just forms of validity that can actually spread. And then these things can be referenced from one context into another context, into another context. One of those references or one of those changes might be from a holochain application up to a blockchain. You might put the results of your game as an entry onto a blockchain, and then everybody can see the result. They can see a reference back down into the holochain game. This is the sort of stuff we've been working with in terms of showcases lately, which is, you can actually take data in a holochain application, data because we can hold so much more in a validated way in holochain than you can in blockchain, because it's so expensive to have those servers all over the place. It's so expensive to get to consensus, right? So, but you can have that data in holochain, have it be validated in these ways. It's a distributed ledger. It has local state validation and an agreement by a community, but then you can have it referenced from a blockchain transaction. This is what we were doing in ETH Denver just this last year, because I know you were at ETH Denver with us the year before last, but just this last month, what we were doing there this year was about showing how you could put all the data that was backing human-powered energy. We had these bicycles that were creating human-powered energy, going into all the sensors were driving into a holochain application, all the data that was saying, this is what the person, they just rode the bike really, really hard, really, really fast. And here's all the data that validates that they did this in holochain. And then it was tokenizing and creating a token. The token was referencing the data in the holochain application. So these are ways that, you can go from one system into another system. There are ways to interoperate between holochain and blockchain. Also, you could do that from holochain into centralized systems as well. That's what Holo's doing, and we're providing that sort of gateway to go from a holochain application into centralized systems.
When we think about what are economic systems, again, in which we can distribute productivity in this new future, it's not always about a universal basic income. What if we allowed everyone to be participants in the rise of more digital applications by also feeling like they were being compensated or part of the flow of that? So it becomes an interesting economic mechanism. But as a technological thing, it is a way of being able to host across centralized and decentralized apps, right?
Absolutely. And so just to be really clear, Holochain is a sort of a protocol. It's a framework for building applications. It's an open source, free to use. It has no internal currency.
Owned by a foundation, not by a company.
It's the IP is owned by the foundation, but it's all open source. So it's usable. Anybody can go download Holochain, start creating Holochain application, that sort of thing. Holo, which is a hosting company, is a little bit different, right? Holo is about creating a distributed hosting environment whereby, yes, you can take Holochain applications and make them accessible on the web, but also, like you were saying, it's about creating an ecosystem where hosts are able to provide value, hosting as a distributed hosting environment. We don't have any data centers for Holo, right? The data center for Holo is distributed in nodes all around the world. And each individual who is providing hosting power, they are part of the economic system. They are part of the hosting infrastructure. Now, Holo, what we're doing is providing some layers of the centralized pieces because it's difficult, right? We think of the internet as this vast global distributed thing, but it is, and there are areas of it that are centralized. There are a lot of areas that are centralized, quite honestly, and you have to tap into those centralized sort of components. And one of them, for example, is routing, right? You have to be able to route to a URL, to a web address. Well, how does that happen? Well, there is what we call DNS, and so you have to be able to.
The current world, do you see that 50 years from now that we're still going to be routing that way, or is this just a stopgap thing to get from here to there?
Okay, now you're opening up a whole nother can of worms.
I'll put it on your futurist hat now.
I will. So in the holo world right now, it's because we do have those things. We're sort of meeting the current internet where it is with Holo. Like, how do you get the decentralized world on Holochain and other things working in a more distributed way? That's what Holo is really all about, right? And how do you have hosts providing that value and being part of that economic gain, as participating in the economy of distributed hosting? But what you're asking about, definitely that's like what I would say is even beyond the bleeding edge. It's really at the level of visionary thinking. And some of the folks we're working with at Holochain are those thinkers, right? Like Arthur and Eric are those visionaries, are those technical visionaries on our team that have been thinking about these levels of protocols, internet protocols, for over a decade, right? How do we transform that? What if the way that we're thinking about internet protocols like TCP/IP are outdated or just not useful enough? What is possible beyond that? And I think there's some really, I think the thing that's most inspiring to me about some of the vision in this area is, as powerful and as amazing as the internet has been for all of us, there's a mechanistic aspect that requires the centralization side of it to exist the way that it does right now. And I would say, from the way I think about it, is that the internet works on a sort of push mechanism, right? I'm not sure that nature works on a push mechanism. I'm pretty sure that nature works more on a flow or pull mechanism. Another way of asking the question that we were really dealing with is, why is it that nature is so resilient, but some of our technical infrastructure requires individual organizations to sort of control everything at a center point where they can turn things off and turn things on? You don't have those center points in nature, but nature seems to work quite well. Communication flows, information flows, people thrive, organisms thrive. How do we take that learning and look at these mechanistic systems, and how do we build something different? If you put a block into a flow in nature, nature finds a way around it. If you have beavers build a dam in the middle of a creek, the creek finds a new path and it splits maybe, and maybe it becomes two streams that end up with two separate thriving ecosystems of organisms. But I think where some of the new innovation thinking and futurist thinking really lives in this is how could it be modeled more like nature? How could it be modeled more regeneratively? How could it be modeled so that it has lots of different places of potential failure, but it's so distributed and so wide that that's how you get your resilience? When you touch upon the frustrations that we have as individuals, medical data, right? That's an area that touches every human. It doesn't matter what country that you live in. It doesn't matter what you're dealing with. Right now, how we deal with privacy and medical data is of concern in most every jurisdiction. And we write policy galore to try to limit how technology can be managed so that we maintain privacy on medical data, because we think that's important for humans. Well, it's really tough. It's really tough. And we've leaned on limiting what we can do to the point where we don't even have access as ourselves to our own information. One of the possibilities is when you get to the point of dealing with your data that's important to you and having access to your data in a framework inside of which you can give permissions because you have enough controls in the system, and you don't put all of the liability on the centralized record holder of the information. That transforms what's possible about you being enabled by this, and you being able to work with your different medical providers with more information, about you.
Then you've got my own personal data, right? So I'm collecting my own data every day when I'm walking, or if I have a glucose monitor, or if I get my DNA get sampled or whatever, right? And you want to be able to have all those, because that's the thing, I think, too. We're going to create more and more and more data sets around our digital twin version of us, right? The question is, who has access to that, or who owns that? Where did I get parked?
It's like it's in all these different disparate places, because these different medical providers, they can't just provide it to one another, because that's what that policy that we put in place, HIPAA, prevents them from doing. So we can't even get some of the potential value of having the cross coordination and pollination of the combination of my own, all my data about me being used to see how things can be made better for my own health. They're not able to share them in those ways. But if we were the central point, if you kind of did that flip that you were talking about at the very beginning, and it became about the humans first and the application second, then what could be made possible? How could we opt into creating even AI models that were safer to use because we weren't sharing the details of that data? What if we were doing the processing more locally? Consider how much processing we all have available right here on our phones. As human beings, we're not going, oh my God, I can't deal with it because there's processing happening in my phone.
Yeah.
I mean, some people might be going, okay, there's just too much to deal with on the front end of my phone.
They're a little bit with the compliance. I'm going to get an upgrade. I'm like, oh my God.
I know, but I'm not talking about making the experience of looking at the front of your phone more difficult, or looking at an application more difficult. I'm actually just saying that the phone is actually the hardware, or the computer that you already are using is the hardware where the processing can be happening, and the sharing out can be more structured to be able to meet the kind of privacy concerns that we already have, and that we can do this in a different way. We can model these things newly when the technology is distributed. If we stick to the centralized architectures, we're still dealing with that. We're going to put these limits on it using policy, and we're not going to let people talk, and we're not going to get the gains that are possible.
So when we talk about safety, how to make sure bad actors don't also take advantage of this in some way, or they figure out how to go and create some sort of centralized answer. How does this freedom and this liberation and this ability to be able to go do things around constrained systems also keep us safer, as opposed to necessarily make it more vulnerable?
If we're talking about in the context directly of Holochain, which I can speak to most easily, Holochain isn't about creating the anonymous everything that some areas of crypto or blockchain have really been focused on. It's not about anonymity, but it is about the differentiation between what is private, what is secret, and what is anonymous or pseudonym. I can never say that word right. Pseudonymity, right? I can say it when I add a few more syllables. But so we're looking at those things in a more nuanced fashion, not just trying to get to anonymous transactions. That's not what we want. It's not what we think is important. Privacy is important. So we need to be able to make applications that can give people the ability to keep some things private and make some things public, share some things with a small group of people. That scale piece that I was talking about earlier in our conversation, it is really important, because when your assumption is that everybody's in one bucket saying everything to everybody, that all of it is visible, when you actually make the internet more humane, you're making it a little bit more compartmentalized. And I don't think that's a problem at all. I think that's actually a representation about how humans engage in groups today in the real world. If we think about modeling human experience in real life in digital spaces, it isn't a billion people in one space. It's different size groups and different coming together for different reasons. And some of them are more contextualized. So that's really important, because it's the combination of architectural features and what this is enabling that creates a different form of safety, right? If you're not worried about, if you create trust circles, well, then you have trust and you have a certain amount of safety. If you guys have a way of being in a group of saying, this is how we behave in the group, these are the rules that we're abiding by. And if you're not abiding by that, then there's sort of then we're not going to keep interacting with you and making things available to you. There's ways and mechanisms with these new technologies to continue to build that and evolve those forms of group choices.
Even if they didn't invade my circle, right? They could have their own circle where they're doing their own nefarious thing.
That's possible. That's possible in the real world, isn't it? That's what happens in real life. I don't know that we're ever going to get away from that being possible. I think what we're trying to say is that we don't want to enable some of the scale that the internet has enabled around those things, right? That's really some of the issue. What can they do with access to millions and billions of people paying attention to their words, paying attention to their pulls for money or what it might be? I mean, I'm not sure which nefarious actors we're talking about right here.
To sum up, right, when you get most excited about this, like, again, I appreciate that you have not been talking about this on such a technological level, but on a more what is possible, conceptual, how do we coordinate level. Like, for me, that whole conversation, right, by how do we create and coordinate differently into the future is really the big opportunity that we have as we think about advancing both consciousness and technology. I remember Art used to always draw these ladders, right, as we become more aware of our connection to one another and our ability to coordinate with one another, how we build those tools that make those things link. What either excites you, or what do you think the big hurdle is right now? Is it just a mindset thing that people just need to kind of shift over? Like, what can we do to help advance this and where we are now?
What I'm most excited about is what I don't know. One of the fundamentals that kind of drives my work is that there's no way that I can really know. And so what I'm excited about is what gets made possible, and what gets made possible through an evolutionary technology. Like, Holochain isn't the answer. It's that it enables a form of sociality that allows us to evolve the digital landscape. Like, evolve. That means there's going to be things that don't work. There's going to be things that work. There's going to be things that aren't possible until 3 evolutions happen, and then suddenly groups have a new way of interacting. This is crazy, but I don't think we can just kind of point to it and create it. Nature doesn't work that way. Evolution doesn't work that way. It actually is a set of failures that kind of lead us down a path to something brand new. And so I am excited about taking that sort of evolutionary, chance-taking, failure-making possibility into digital realms, because that's the difference about something that's kind of grounded in nature designs versus something grounded in mechanistic designs. In mechanistic designs, it's all about predicting, then this will happen, then this will happen, then this will happen. Well, I don't know. Oh my gosh, how exciting. That is a little bit fabulous, and that may scare a lot of people, but that's what gets me. That's what gets me going, because I think that's about being truly at the bleeding edge around it, and it's not just about the technology. That's about the technology and the sociality.
I've heard you say this before too, which is that it's also rising again at the same time that we are thinking about regenerative systems and more communal systems, and certainly new ways of being able to distribute, whether it's information or economic opportunity. And so I do think that we don't know how that's all going to take shape together, but I do think, again, these things are rising up, so that as there's a need for this, there is increasingly a desire for that.
And the parts we do know are that people are already creating some of those systems, the circular economy structures, and even the ways of like looking at value, and value exchange, and what is value. Like, I love that we're in a time and place that we're really addressing those things in new ways, and so that we could actually have a technology that kind of fits those models that people are coming up with, that they can now experiment with, both the ideas, the mechanisms, the structures, and the technological models for making those things kind of take off. Oof. That's
I know. That's why I do get very, very excited too when we start to think about what's possible here. What would be the thing that we could do to help advance this? Is it just getting more developers in there starting to play with this, which I know has been a big focus for the last few years?
Who's going to take risks? A lot of the earliest projects that are going to bring all the sort of like the credibility and the proof making that you need in something that is distinctive and kind of cutting edge is like you have to work with people who are already like, I have a problem. I've tried to solve it this way, that way, and the other way. I haven't been able to solve it. Great. I'm going to try yours now. That's a lot of who's saying, I'd like to use Holochain. People who have like said, okay, I can't get what I'm trying to get out of centralized technology. I've tried using 2 or 3 different blockchains maybe already, because they've been around long enough for them to try. And they talked to us 3 years ago. They've come back and now they're putting their solution on Holochain. Okay, that's an example of somebody that's doing uptake right now. Another other thing is like, who are the people trying to disrupt? The disruptors are the people looking to break up something new. They're willing to take a risk. They know they have to take a risk in order to disrupt an existing thing. I don't think the existing powers that be are the places where you're going to get the initial adoption. They will take it up once they've seen that it's solving a problem and other disruptors are starting to do it. So really, it's about being in the innovation spaces, whether those are the social innovations, the economic innovations, those spaces where you've got disruptors.
I will give a cheer to my enterprise innovation people who are dealing with huge, massive data problems that they're trying to navigate right now and to either coordinate or keep safe. That I think that this, we talk about this exponential growth in data. There's got to be some way to be able to manage it. And I think the current systems aren't holding it very, very well. So the question, I think, is just a mindset thing about whether or not an enterprise player who's used to, monetizing or financializing or coordinating or whatever this level can kind of plug in with something that's got such a different kind of structure or ethos, or to your point, evolutionary, thing. I think that is where the mindset shift or the coordination capacity needs to exist.
And it will exist there. And maybe it's because I've been in startup long enough to know it's like when you're talking about those decisions get made with a bunch of different prerequisites about how they'll make that choice, right? And so I think that like you're asking, how can you help? Well, those people aren't ready to say yes. They may be ready to experiment. So if you have folks in that space that have basically the innovation lab where they're willing to experiment, but they don't think that they don't know that we're the answer at this stage, but they want to see like, well, what does it do? How does it work? That's great. But who they're going to be looking to is the folks who are dealing with millions and billions of rows of transactions at an innovation disruption level. That is why I think that when you talk about people who are coming in with brand new regenerative finance, regenerative projects, because we have no choice, we're stuck. The challenge is that we're trying to solve something in parts of the world that there isn't the sort of infrastructure in place for the centralized solutions to work. We have to look at something that can be more distributed, smaller, but generate up the validated data all the way up, whether you're talking about carbon regeneration, whether you're talking about soil regeneration, whatever those things are. These are real issues out in the world all over. Climate change is making that real. And those are areas where we're taking risks because we have to.
Yeah, we're sort of, again, not even taking risks. I think that we're looking for solutions that we're finally finding a way to be able to go and activate the thing that we've envisioned that we want to activate, and we've been unable to do. And that's why I think, again, at one point, we've been talking about this for a long time, that the frustrated blockchain people were going to find their way here, because it was promised to be this technology that was going to allow all these things to happen, and it just doesn't work that way. And so... I was thinking of Holochain as it was called, I guess, sort of post-blockchain technology. I would say, like, beyond.
We talk about it that way.
I know. I want to say beyond blockchain.
One of the big things, and depending on who you're talking to, and I'm like who your audience is like those of us who are speaking to, like, we are the demand for a different kind of internet. We are the demand for a different kind of web experience. And when I say we, I don't mean just the people who are in my position as a CEO of an innovation company. I mean our friends and users of everyday applications. It is all over the internet that we are frustrated with being given terms of service that really scare us and don't make us happy. Well, the only way change is coming is if we're willing to do a shift, right? We have to also be willing to say no to something to say yes to something new. So I'll give the example. Recently, and I tweeted about this not too long ago. I don't know if I can use that word anymore. But
it doesn't sound really good to say X'd about this recently. So all right,
it just isn't the thing. but DocuSign changed their terms of service not too long ago and basically said all of your contracts that you put up in DocuSign are going to go into an LLM and be used and have AI, access to your documents. I am not okay with that.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm not okay with the output of it because I don't know who else is putting their documents into DocuSign and whether or not I trust their lawyers and the nuances of the law in the jurisdictions that they're going to then create new document stuff. Because what are they going to do this for? The reason they're going to do this is to make other things available to people, right? And try to make some money off of the templated contracts that might be able to be possible in the future. Well, I'm not okay with that. I spend a lot of time making sure that these things go in. It has information that sometimes is not public information, and I do not want in an LLM. And I absolutely say no to it. Well, we wrote 2 years ago a blog post about why DocuSign should be written in Holochain. And it's exactly because you want your document to be signed by you and somebody else in a valid context. You do not need somebody in the middle holding your data. In fact, it's not that you don't need them. You don't want them in the middle. And those are when we find those use cases, we need to be a demand for something new. As end users, we have to be a demand for something new. Holochain makes this possible, that you don't have somebody in the middle in areas where you want to contract and not have a middleman. Be a demand for that. That's what we need.
Well, I will say, when people always are surprised that I'm so optimistic about the future when we start to see so much of this kind of thing, right? More and more encroachment and more breakdown and more things that don't feel good. I always still go back to, I get to hang out with people like you and Art and Eric and the people who are building a future that allows us to be able to transcend this moment that we're in right now. So as things are starting to get more again, heavy or constrained, I feel like we've got more demand then to be able to go jump to this other thing that you guys have been working so hard to build and will continue to work so hard to build. So I'm super grateful, Mary. I do want to encourage, we don't have just women that listen to this. Hopefully men listen to this too, but we definitely have a lot of women who listen to these conversations. And I do think we want to encourage more and more women to be in this space. It is, you've talked about this before about sort of the dearth of people who are coming with technical skills that are able to go do this. But even if you don't have the technological skill and you know how to program in Rust, right? The fact that you care about these conversations and want to be part of the framing of it and the storytelling of it and the ways of being able to plug things together, I think are really, really important. And I do think this technology actually, interestingly, feels more welcoming to women or a feminine perspective. Right? There's sort of a formation of it or a way of thinking about it that actually feels more aligned with how it is that we probably walk through the world. So I hope that this encourages more women to be curious about this and, to become advocates and learn more about what you guys are up to or what we are up to. I want to say we. I want to be part of the we. I have actually on my LinkedIn resume that I am a champion for this. I gave myself a job title, which is like, So I will continue to be, and I'm so grateful for you, Mary, and for all that you do, and how much love you bring to this, and how much optimism you bring to this, and how much care you bring to this, so we can be it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Nancy, and thank you for doing this and really spotlighting and highlighting how women are, transforming the world. I mean, it is important that we are seeing each other in these spaces and that we're making it visible to those who are coming and taking on the next roles of leadership and of, really, I'm going to include the technical because I think it's so critical that women are part of the technical transformation. Who writes code is important because we write our values into code. So if you're listening to this, women, write code because you're writing your values into the future. And that is important. So
that's a big line. If you're writing code, you're writing values into the future. That's a big one. I love you. Thank you so much for being a part of all this. I can't wait to go and hang out again together. And, here's to building a brighter, more inclusive, safer, healthier, thriving future for us all.